and welcome to another episode of Twilight Chapters. Today we are reading Beyond the Bright Sea by Lauren Wolk. Enjoy!
Beyond the Bright Sea by Lauren Wolk. Prologue. My name is Crow. When I was a baby, someone tucked me into an old boat and pushed me out to sea. I washed up on a tiny island like a seed riding the tide. It was Osh who found me and took me in, who taught me how to put down roots and thrive on both sun and rain and understand what it is to bloom. The island where we found each other was small but strong, anchored by a great pile of black rock that sheltered our cottage, a ramshackle place built from bits of lost ships, nestled on a bed of earth and sea muck, alongside a small garden and the skiff that took us wherever our feet could not. We didn't need anything else, not in the beginning. At low tide, we could cross easily to the next island, Cuttyhunk, through shallows strewn with bootlace weed and minnows. At high tide, the cottage sat so close to the risen sea that it felt nearly like a boat itself. For a long time, I was happiest when the water rose and set us apart, on our own, so just the two of us decided everything there was to decide. And then, one night when I was 12, I saw a fire burning on Pennakeys, the island where no one ever went, and I decided on my own that it was time to find out where I'd come from and why I'd been sent away. But I didn't understand what I was risking until I nearly lost it. Chapter 1. I'll never know for sure when I was born. Not exactly. On the morning Osh found me, I was just hours old, but he had no calendar and didn't much care what day it was. So we always marked my birth on whatever midsummer day felt right. The same was true of my other milestones, moments that had nothing to do with calendars. Like the day Mouse showed up at our door, whisker thin, and decided the cottage was hers, too, much as I had. Or the first time Osh let me take the tiller of our skiff while he sat in the bow and let the sun coddle his face for a while, his back against the mast, the fine spray veiling him in rainbows. Or the ebb tide when a white-sided dolphin stranded on our shore, Osh gone somewhere, and I came back from Cuttyhunk to find her rocking and heaving, her cries baby-like and afraid. I used my bare hands to scoop away the wet sand that stuck her fast, and I grabbed her crescent flukes and tugged inch by inch until the water lifted her enough, so we both slipped back suddenly into the sea. She looked me in the eye as she passed, as if to memorize what I was at that moment, as if to say that I should remember this too, no matter what happened later, none of which had anything to do with calendars. Still, I know I'd lived on that tiny island for 8 years before I began to be more than just curious about my name. The dream that woke me, wondering anew about my name, was full of stars and whales blowing in the lyrics of the sea. When I opened my eyes, I lay for a minute, watching Osh as he stood at the stove, cooking porridge in a scabby pot. I sat up and rubbed the sleep from my eyes. "Why is my name Crow?" I asked. When Osh stirred the porridge, the spoon made a sound like a boat being dragged across the beach. "I've told you," he said. "You were hoarse with crying when you washed up here. You cawed over and over, so I called you Crow." That answer had always been enough before, but it didn't explain everything. And everything was what I had begun to want. "In English?" I asked. Osh sometimes spoke in a language I didn't know, his voice like music, especially when he prayed, but also when he painted his pictures of the islands and the sea. When I first asked Osh about it, he said that it was one of the few things he'd kept from life before the island, before me. Even though he did not speak it often, that other tongue flavored his English, so he sounded different from everyone else. Miss Maggie called it his accent, but I thought maybe it was everyone else who had an accent. "No, not English at first," he said, "but people here speak English, so Crow." I stood and stretched the night out of my bones. My arms, in the thin morning light, looked almost nothing like wings. But when I stepped onto a stool in front of our mirror, just big enough for a face, I could see the resemblance in the curve of my nose, the birthmark on my cheek that looked like a little feather, my hair darker than anyone else's, my dark eyes, my skin like Osh's after 6 months in the sun. I looked down at my skinny legs, my bony feet. Plenty of other reasons to be called Crow besides the way I had once cried. Osh himself had 3 names. Daniel, what Miss Maggie called him. The painter, what the summer people called him. Osh, what I had called him since the time I could make words out loud. His real name was complicated, difficult for a small child to say. Osh was all I'd been able to manage, and Osh was what I'd called him ever since. I wish I knew what my real name was, I said. For a long moment, Osh was still. What do you mean by real? He said. My real name, the one my parents gave me. Osh was again silent for a while. Then he said, You were brand new when you arrived here. I don't know that you ever had a different name. He scooped some porridge into a bowl, and if you did, I don't know how we'll ever learn what it was. I fetched 2 spoons. What it is, you mean? When Osh shrugged, the hair that lay on his shoulders rolled up like night waves. Was, is, will be. He filled a second bowl. It doesn't much matter, since you're here now, and you have a name. The sound of the porridge thwopping into the crockery, the talk of the wooden spoon against the edge of the bowl, made me wonder who had named those things, and everything else in the world, including me. I could feel my curiosity strengthening, as if it were part of my bones, keeping pace with them as I grew. But more than that, more than simple curiosity, I had a nagging need to know what I didn't know. I wanted to know why there were pearls tucked inside some of the Cuttyhunk oysters, but not others. I wanted to know how the moon could drag the ocean in and out from such a distance when it couldn't stir the milk in Miss Maggie's tea. But I needed to know, among other things, why so many of the Cuttyhunk Islanders stayed away from me, as if they were afraid, when I was smaller than any of them. I wondered whether it had anything to do with where I'd come from, but that didn't make any sense. What did where have to do with what, or who? Something, yes, but not everything. And I needed to know all 3. Osh didn't. When I asked questions about pearls or tides, he did his best to answer them. But when I looked beyond our life on the islands, he became the moon itself, bent on tugging me back, as if I were made of sea instead of blood. I came a long, long way to be here, he once said when I asked him about his life before the one we shared. As far as I could get from a place where people, where my own brothers, jumped headlong into such terrible fighting that no one could see a thing through the bedlam. And for what? Over what? He shook his head. Over nothing worth the fight. So I refused to be one of them, and here I am, and here I'll stay. While I waited for Osh to bring our porridge to the table, I tried to think of another name that suited me well, but I came up with nothing better than Crow, which I already had. And it pleased me that I was named for a bird that was smarter than most, smarter even than some people. So different from the gulls and fishhawks that wheeled and dipped over the islands that I felt a certain kinship with the big black birds that drifted over from the mainland like lost kites, tipping to and fro in the wind before settling noisily in Miss Maggie's hornbeam tree. They didn't seem to belong on the islands, and sometimes I felt like I didn't either. But we were islanders nonetheless, no matter what anyone else might think. Osh called me other animal names from time to time. Cub, Kit, Mule when I was stubborn, Wren when I was good. Now and then he called me a mooncusser too, because I liked to scour the shore at night for whatever the tide had brought in. But I did not lure the ships that wrecked off Cuttyhunk, and I was no thief afraid of being moonlit as I searched for lost treasure. I had never cussed the moon. But for the most part, we didn't rely on names. If we were apart, we were far apart beyond calling. If we were together, we talked the way people talk when there's no one else. Names didn't matter much.
And that's it for the first chapter of Beyond the Bright Sea by Lauren Wolk. If you enjoyed it and want to hear more, you can check it out as an ebook or request it at our curbside service. Enjoy!